Hello everyone, welcome to the next episode of IICIE Insight, and today I'm joined by my good friend and colleague at APMA Institute of Automotive Cybersecurity, Colin Dhillon. I wanted to have Colin here because I believe Colin is one of the few individuals across the globe who have a very wide perspective on the transformation happening on the mobility space. So Colin, welcome to the show.
AJ, thank you very much for having me.
We'll talk about everything, and we'll try to talk very little about cyber because we talk about cyber every day, all the time. So, Colin, why don't we begin by you giving us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Again, Colin Dhillon. Current position is the Chief Technical Officer at the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association of Canada. Prior to that, I am a designer by trade or my academic background. I used to work at one of Canada's largest tier ones where I ran the design studios, global advanced product development, R&D, corporate social responsibility, and marketing and comms for the company. As well as I used to lecture part-time at local colleges in the Greater Toronto area, design predominantly, to designers and to technical people. I just like to keep myself busy, AJ.
That I know. So I think you just mentioned your background a little bit. So you're an innovator, you're a storyteller, you're a designer, and you're also a teacher. So that kind of makes you a great person for mentoring tech entrepreneurs, because one of the things which I feel tech entrepreneurs lack is not looking at the big picture. So can you just give your insights on why storytelling and design is so critical for looking at the big picture?
You know, I had a great conversation yesterday. I've got a side project I've been working on for a few years. I'm writing a book. It's more of an autobiographical product with some self-help. And the conversation was with an individual who's very good at branding and marketing. And he was walking me through and kind of giving me tips about how we should position the book, the title. We spent, I think, a good part of lunch yesterday talking about the cover of the book. And the one thing that came through in some of his questions to me was, well, you know, how do you think? And I said, well, I use design thinking for pretty much everything that I do. It was a process where you have the ideation, the problem, the ideation, how you begin to solve it. You then have to look at executing, and then you have to execute the problem, i.e. you have a problem and you have somehow sorted the problem out. That is the complete process. It was something that was introduced to me back in the UK when I was at high school at the age of 15. And to be honest, AJ, I've used that same design thinking process, both in life and I would say in business. And when we talk about tech people, or we talk about people who are specialized in any particular field, to me, we're all trying to figure out solutions. And so I think that process is what's helped me. And the storytelling, I think, comes more from the fact that you learn to be able to share your thoughts and your experiences. And so that's something that I've always done. If I read something and I find it interesting, I'm desperate to share it with people around me.
And you did mention your design thinking and design background. So I really wanted to let the audience know about your design successes, such as the Dodge Ram 1500. So can you give me more details about that?
Well, yeah. So the Dodge Ram 1500, specifically the Ram Box edition, which is the one which has the storage on the sides of the pickup bed. That was my baby when I was at my previous company. It was a project we challenged Humber College students to come up with storage in more unusual places around a pickup vehicle. And then when we wrote the design brief, had some great ideas, we then pitched those ideas to General Motors first, who weren't interested. Ford wanted us to work on a different type of product for storage. And back then, in like 2004, 5, Daimler, it was Daimler Chrysler back then, they were interested, and we did a partnership where we built and engineered and then manufactured that part. But I've been fortunate to work on multiple projects. I believe I have about 6 to 7 patents on my name. Coming up with new solutions is something the auto sector has always been interested in. People sometimes think that the OEM, the original equipment manufacturing establishment, like a Ford, a GM, Chrysler, come up with everything by themselves, which isn't really true. I remember in the early 90s, one of the reasons Magna and Magna International did so well was because they were generating so many new ideas and solutions. And when you do that, you simply pitch them to these car companies. And if they like it, they will go ahead with it. And there is a very good chance if you've come up with the idea and you've pitched it, you will manufacture it, which is where you make your money.
And definitely, we're living through an age of transformation and mobility where a lot of innovation is happening actually. And it's happening across digital manufacturing, smart cities, electric vehicles, and cyber for that matter in connected and autonomous vehicles. And you are at the center of it all. I think you're one of the few individuals across the world, as I said previously, who has that perspective. So, what do you think about that change, that transformation we're living through?
We truly are going through the digital age, AJ, and it's some people may find it daunting. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I wish I was 20 years younger. This is going to be such a pivotal part in world history, because technology, whether we go back to the 1700s and talk about the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, technology and the humans were detached. There were always a separation. There was the human driving the steam engine to generate power. It was the human who had applied electricity and made it power the home that he or she lived in. It was the computers that were used to computate information quickly and send it globally. And now we're going through a period where you're going to begin seeing, especially when we get closer to the Industrial Revolution 5.0, where cognitive, technologies are going to be coming to the forefront, where you're going to be operating things by thought, where companies like Tesla's or Elon Musk's Neuralinks are going to be tapping into your portions of your brain and try and help, diseases and conditions like Alzheimer's. There is going to be so much coming. And so what I typically do, AJ, is I look at what's coming in the next 10 to 20 years, and I try and bring that back to try and implement it here today. Hence why, you introduced and said that I'm in the connected autonomous vehicle area. And then right away, you and I met and we started to really push cybersecurity in the automotive sector, specifically in through the supply chain and manufacturing areas. And then, I wrote an article nearly 2 years ago called Smart Cars, Dumb Infrastructure, which was a pushback on people who were asking me all the time, so when are we going to see autonomous vehicles? And I used to say, well, maybe we need to smarten up our infrastructure before we see autonomous vehicles. Don't just rely on the technology being on the vehicle. We have to make sure the technology is all around the vehicle as well, its ecosystem. And so really some of that thinking comes from trying to see down the pipeline in what's coming and begin to implement it, as well as always feeling that there is a bit of a race going on. We're in competition globally. And the truth is, China is going to currently look at kicking our backsides because they are embracing the digital change. They are embracing new technologies a lot quicker than we here in North America.
That's I, I just feel that there's a whole book in that answer. There's so many things happening over there, and I think that there's a chapter on each one of those topics over there. But you did mention the global challenge which Canada has right now on enabling these technologies, the global competition which is out there. And I believe you are doing a lot in that regard with Project Arrow, trying to enable the Canadian automotive supply chain.
Again, an AJ, it's another example of where we're looking down the sights of the barrel of a gun to see, where the target is. And Canada's got a 117, 18-year history of building great cars, but not for their own OEMs, but for other OEMs. Started with Ford and General Motors, and now we have the Japanese, and hopefully in the near future, we'll have Chinese as well as European car manufacturers here in Canada. So when you've got 100 plus years of building some very good vehicles, and let me put that into context. Last year, Toyota Canada in Cambridge, Ontario was awarded the J.D. Power Platinum Award for its assembly plant. And when you're given the Platinum Award, it means you are the best in the world. And so in context, the Toyota plant in Cambridge was better than the Toyota plant in Japan. Just let that sink in. So this is how good, and it wasn't the first time they won it. It was actually the third time they've won it. And Ford Oakville, GM Oshawa, Brampton Chrysler, they've all been recipients of great awards for assembly. It's not a untold or unknown secret. We build some fantastic cars here because of the skilled labor force we have. And then if you apply technology to that as well, we've got the fastest growing tech sector in North America. For the past 2 years, we've generated more tech jobs than Silicon Valley, Washington, D.C., and Seattle in Washington state combined. This is just the GTA. I am not including Montreal. I am not including Ottawa. I'm not including even parts like Windsor in this. This is just the GTA. So when you apply those two together, where are they heading? Well, for us, it means it's heading towards zero emission vehicles, and it's heading towards a level 3 plus autonomous vehicle technology. And what better way for a trade association to support its members than to demonstrate by building Canada's first concept zero emission vehicle? And that's what Project Arrow is, AJ. It's going to see the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association, along with all of its members, as well as we expect multiple levels of government, provincial, as well as federal, coming together and us developing a vehicle which becomes a showcase platform of the best of the best. And I'll mention one company, E1 Moly Energy, which was founded in British Columbia about 40 years ago. Without E1 Moly, we wouldn't have lithium battery packs, which allow us to have power tools which don't have to be connected to a piece of wire. E1 Moly was behind this, and the gentleman who's behind Tesla's 1 million mile battery is Jeff Dawn, and Jeff used to work at E1 Moly. He's now a professor at Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia. And so, when you kind of bring that level of expertise and knowledge into this Project Arrow, for example, we really think it's going to make a difference. And we're also, not only are we here to help showcase the best of the best, but we're also hoping Canadians begin to understand that they themselves can have their own OEMs. They can become their own Teslas, their own Rivians, and all these new startups that are occurring south of the border. We feel Canada is poised and positioned to be a OEM, or to have its own OEMs as well in the next 5 to 10 years.
And definitely, I know that Project Arrow has a lot of support from all levels of Canadian government and also the Ontario government. But besides that, from the entire automotive manufacturing ecosystem. So I do believe that you are actually building the next generation of automotive suppliers in Canada, especially on the connected components side, the electronics inside the vehicle. That would be amazing as we move forward.
Yeah, we call them auto tech SMEs. A lot of them are small and medium-sized enterprises at the moment, AJ. So yes, we are. We're challenging existing tech companies to consider the becoming a supplier in the auto sector. One of my projects before I joined the APMA at my previous company in R&D was I'd labeled it smart plastics. I said to the teams and the C-suite that, look, we make plastic. Everybody knows we make plastic parts, and we make them really well, both in the interior of the vehicle and the exterior. And the challenge was, why can't we embed smart technology within the plastic, which suddenly gives an additional value to what we're providing? And so that is something that I know they are continuing on with, and it's just always about adding technology and looking at a vehicle, because the vehicle is about to go through a tremendous change as well, AJ. As we get closer to a level 4 autonomy, you and I aren't going to be necessarily driving these anymore. We're going to become passengers. And so what does that do to our behavior and our time? And, we just finished our annual conference, the first time we did it virtually. A big kudos and well done to one of my colleagues, Warren Alley, who kind of, instrumentally put this whole thing, these 3 days, over 70 speakers together. And one of the last talks on day 3 was the vehicle as a caregiver. We were talking with Dr. Milos and his team at the Kite Research Institute and 2 other companies about, how can the vehicle provide longevity, whether it's through driving or at least delivering passengers from A to B, whether you be aged, whether you have a disability, so, this was the topic, the vehicle as a caregiver. Who would have thought, a vehicle could be providing care and support? But this is what's going to happen when your hands aren't at 10 to 2 on the steering wheel, AJ.
Actually, I listened to that particular webinar, and that was very interesting from so many different perspectives. One of the things which was discussed in that was that through facial recognition and through various methods, they could see the driver's ability to drive. And if the driver is facing some kind of situation where he's not feeling well or she's not feeling well, then the vehicle could take over and actually ensure safety of the passengers. And that was amazing. That was I never even thought about that.
And the thing is, AJ, that technology is here today. There would be biometric sensors applied around the vehicle, in the seat, in front of you. And as you were describing, there'd be a sensory optical camera which would be able to detect, AJ's face when he's normal, AJ's face when he's frustrated, AJ's face when maybe there's a health issue going on. And so there is so much that's coming. The challenge is we have to make sure we are diligent when it comes to safety, though. We have to make sure, as we embrace more and more technology, that we aren't turning a blind eye to its safety around us as individuals, as the occupants or as the users. I know you and I are happy to talk about this because safety, security and privacy are some of the topics we enjoy touching upon anyway.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about cyber because that's who I am. So, and I think thinking about the vehicle as a caregiver, so emergency response vehicles, what are the cyber implications if something goes wrong over there? The patient data, what is the response on that if something happens? So I think what we are doing at APMA Institute of Automotive Cybersecurity really speaks to that. Can you tell us from your perspective how you see that?
Yeah, it's, whether you're reading a regulation coming out of the, European Union, it's, WP29, and they really highlight the importance of data and who owns the data, i.e., the occupant or the individual and his or her, ownership of that data, to what happens to that data, because, it's quite easy for us to just be flippant about, well, it's in the cloud. But is it secure? Is it being transferred securely? Is it being held securely in the cloud? And what happens if somebody gets another person's, let's for example say health, status, through that? How do we make sure that this isn't as naive as, let's be honest, a lot of people would think, well, hold on, it's security and privacy by design. But AJ, you and I know it's not. It's, cybersecurity for, I wouldn't say the most part, but for a lot of it is being thought as an afterthought. It's an addition to. It is not one of the basis thoughts that are being had when new digital products and software are being developed. What we're trying to do, I know AJ, you've been doing it for many years, and what we're now trying to do here in the automotive sector is to make security and privacy and cyber safety by design, which could hopefully really change the outlook of what's being generated and make things a lot more secure.
Yeah, and ultimately, of course, it's all about the impact on human life, and the human life is something which we are looking at in this transformation in mobility from multiple areas. Cyber is just one of them. But as we move into smart cities, the other area where the vehicle plays a role is V2X and all the transformation around that. So you see the vehicle becoming the center of smart cities.
I see it becoming the center of the universe, and I'm probably biased from spending the last 20 years in the auto sector. But yeah, V2X, vehicle to everything connectivity. You and I are going to be wearing wearables, clothing with technology embedded into it, which is talking and communicating with the environment around you. You're going to see the vehicle, because people forget. People think this is some kind of it's a showcase of technology, autonomous vehicles, and really it isn't. We forget the reason, the US kind of, military organization, DARPA, challenged back in the early 2000s, universities, academia, to come up with vehicles that could drive on their own. The reason they did this was because 94% of all accidents are human error. The reason we're pushing for autonomous is to make our roads and our lives safer. And so V2X, kind of begins to answer that whole smart cars, dumb infrastructure. The more V2X we have, the more potential for autonomous vehicles to be on the roads. And, I'm reading a book by Naveen Jain. It's called Moonshots. And if you've not heard of Naveen, this gentleman who lives out in Silicon Valley is just a phenomenon. It's just unbelievable. His way of thinking on multiple fronts, whether his background is kind of mechanical engineering, but when he talks about medical and medical devices, you would think he was a practicing doctor. But Naveen in his book talks about the introduction of the elevator in the 1920s, I believe, and how people, were absolutely and utterly against it. Now, think about it, AJ. You were in a 30-story building and you were expected to get into this rectangle and be shot down in fractions of the time that it would have taken to come down the stairs. Were you going to get into that thing? Were you going to be jumping into that saying this is the safest thing since sliced bread? And so if you use the same analogy, and when we think about autonomous vehicles, there's a lot of pushback. Yes, there have been some accidents, one or two fatal as well. But the reality is the objective, the outcome is to make vehicles and the occupants of the vehicles and the occupants around the vehicles safer. And I think we shouldn't forget that.
I think what you just mentioned about human behavior, I know that it applies to me. I would not like to be in a vehicle which drives itself. I like to be in control of the vehicle. And one of the things which I really enjoy is just taking my vehicle out and not using the navigation system, just driving where I want to do. So what would happen to that?
It's going to be it'll be a cultural change. I think we'll probably still be able to maybe do that, AJ, but we'll have to tell the vehicle, hey, please turn the GPS off and get me to Cambridge, Ontario, but not by the 401. It'll be probably something like that where it's now trying to navigate and because of AI and machine learning, it will begin to learn. It may not get it right the first time. It may take you along the parallel road which leads to Cambridge, and then you'll say, no, I want to go through towns and villages and cities before I get to Cambridge, and then it will begin to understand. Because artificial intelligence, which is again, just like cybersecurity, it's foundational for this digitization of our world, is going to bring in intelligence into software and hardware like we've never known before.
So both you and me are individuals who like to learn, and I guess that's one reason why I like to have these IICI insights. There's so much here to learn, but that does mean that there's lots of opportunities out there in this brave new world. What are the opportunities you see?
AJ, it's people talk about, oh, technology is going to take your jobs away from you. I think their mindsets and outlooks are completely reversed. Instead of saying it will replace some of the more mundane work potentially, but it's going to generate so many more new jobs and opportunities. Let's talk about robots. I remember sitting in a class at high school and being told, well, robots are going to take your jobs. And to be honest, the robots I've worked around over the past 20 years were never going to be taking my jobs, because these things had to be caged. You had PLCs being programmed, and they've been told to pick up a part, place the part, change the head, put on a cutting head on, cut the part out, and then change the head, pick up the pickup part head, and then remove the part. You had to cage yourself because it would not understand or identify an individual around them. Today, we have collaborative robots, which have sensors built in and around and in their complete kind of ecosystem. That would allow AJ or Colin or anybody else to stand next to a robot, and that robot would not be kind of hitting you because it would sense you and be able to stop. And so that advancements is around sensory technology, and I try and describe to people the sensory technology we're embedding into vehicles is very similar. There are three types basically. You've got radar through millimeter wave, you've got LiDAR, and you've got optical camera sensory technology, and those applied in a environment like a manufacturing environment, or if they're applied around a vehicle, pretty much are trying to do the same job. And so for me, coding was something I didn't enjoy when I was at school. It was in its infancy. But there was a coding course, a good friend, Sarabjit Johal, out of the Valley in California. He put up a link over the weekend. There's a coding class. I think it's $10. It's a 2-day course, and I'm thinking about taking it. And then when I kind of looked at some of the imagery, it just brought back that, I remember why I didn't want to take this at college or university. But I think education is going to begin to change, and what's asked, because remember, high school is about preparing the youth for the workforce. Let's not be naive to think that high school and the system wants everybody to go to university and they don't want anybody to be blue collar working class. No, it's actually developed to make sure that a certain portion of the population never graduates, and they will always rely upon government. There will be a vast majority who will be the workforce, and then there will be a small minority who go on to further education and do bachelor's and master's and PhDs. And so I think what will change over the next decade or so, or it should, will be the education and preparing students to go towards, a career where, they are working next to machines or around equipment like smart equipment.
Yeah, and that does mean that we have to do a lot of work in our education system, but also, I guess, in our various employment sectors, how that sector actually looks at potential people who can join the workforce. So a lot of work needs to be done, and I think from our perspective, the automotive sector needs to look at that. But even further, I think it needs to look at the global ecosystem, how we can actually add value to the global ecosystem through what we are doing. Because I was looking at one study which was talking about 36 smart cities being developed across the world. Uh, there's a lot of collaboration which can be done over there.
Absolutely. China, and in December of 2019 had implemented full 5G into 50 cities throughout China. And I talk about this last year when the world was not in a pandemic and I was traveling more and speaking more. I would bring that up to say that is the beginning of their stopwatch has been pressed for the rest of the world, because North America and Europe is beginning to embrace 5G, beginning to. How many cities? Very few. There are some telecom cellular companies talking about 5G cell phones and connect and wavelengths. They're not full 5G, to be honest. So China will probably have 18 months to 2 years of a head start when it comes to 5G, and I'm sure they'll be working on 6G. So that has to be understood. 5G, why are we talking 5G? It's because it's the signaling and the transfer of information is so greatly reduced compared to LTE and 4G. That it reduces the lag and latency, especially in a autonomous vehicle. I remember being in a car in the smart city of Stratford 2 years ago when we actually did, I think it was one of North America's first 5G tests in an autonomous vehicle. And we sat in this Ford 350 with technology, and the signal, the tower was owned by Bell Communications with some hardware from a Chinese company. And the signal went from the city of Stratford to Toronto downtown and back to the vehicle. And I didn't notice any lag or latency in the communication to turn left or to turn right in this vehicle. And so it is very exciting, but yes, it's going to really help to propel the whole smart city initiative. And I think collaboration, AJ, is always key. I think there is collaboration happening now between OEMs, Honda and General Motors coming together for electric vehicle development. There is more and more collaboration happening because it is very new. As much as technology and digitization has been introduced maybe a decade or so ago, it wasn't, and it hasn't been embraced. And now that it's suddenly being embraced by other global jurisdictions in a hurry, others feel the need to collaborate in order to get ahead.
Colin, I do want to, as we come towards the end of our coffee chat, by the way, have you had your morning coffee?
My secret is I don't drink tea or coffee, mate.
so this is our coffee chat.
This is our coffee chat.
I do want to come back to the basics. Like we talk smart cities and autonomous vehicles and technology and everything. But at the end of the day, we are human beings, and human beings have to look at the future, but they also have to look at where they're coming from. And I know that your book actually looks at that, and it is about your great Sikh heritage and it how that makes you who you are. Can you just tell us more about that?
Appreciated, AJ. So, listen, I'm not a writer. My wife will tell you that I can barely spell and put a sentence together. But about 6 years ago, I was fortunate to meet a gentleman whose name, when it was described as Michael Clemens, I had no idea who he was. It was only when he wrote another email and he put pinball in the middle that I suddenly became aware, oh, it's Pinball Clements, the famous CFL Toronto Argonauts player / manager. Pinball and I became friends about 7 years ago, and we would do lunch several times a year, and we would talk, and he would always want to know more about me and my time growing up in the UK in the 70s and the 80s. And he began to say this one thing over and over again, which is, you have every reason to walk around with a chip on your shoulder and you don't. And we have to share that with everybody. And I'd be like, okay. And he'd be like, you've got to write a book. And I'm like, I'm not a writer. He's like, get a ghostwriter. I can't afford to get a ghostwriter. And well, you've got to write it yourself. Long story short, I found an editor. I began to write. I wrote extensively, probably 50,000 words. And then I shelved it about 2.5, 3 years ago, because I could see my career potentially going in a different direction and a change. And I had to spend a lot of time around this as opposed to this book I was writing. And really what I also wanted to do is that, the secret, or why doesn't Colin walk around, or why didn't he walk around with a chip on his shoulder, and why don't I carry what I call luggage or baggage from past experiences, and why do I have this so-called positive outlook to life, and how am I able to solve problems and create solutions, whether they be solving problems in a relationship, or whether they be solving problems that are in the manufacturing sector. It comes second nature to me. I decided to then add several chapters, which I call self-help, where I view some of the theories and philosophies I've come up with. I've spent, AJ, I've been to the Himalayas. I've followed my faith, the Sikh faith, closely. I've spent years meditating. I meditate, which I actually call quiet time, because I feel it's easier to swallow as opposed to meditation. I've been on the inner journey. My whole thing is the inner journey. I feel if you begin to know who you are as a person, it then allows it to be reflected on the exterior, and for others to appreciate who you are as a person. I reference a song from the Beatles, Eleanor Rigby and the faces she keeps by a jar by the door, to say we all wear these faces, and sometimes we just need to peel them off and to appreciate who we really are, and to be content. And to be then committed, and then to then contribute to the globe. And so, the book is a journey of me, some stories, some sad, some funny, but it hopefully tells the story of this young immigrant born and brought up in the UK, who dreamt a lot, dreams a lot, had aspirations. And today, I'm a ripe old age of 50. I'm not a young fella anymore. And, I've got hopefully years of wisdom. I've got years of knowledge and support. And I'm trying to give back, which is what I've always done. I love lecturing because it allowed me to give back. And hopefully this book will allow me to give back to the greater global community as well, because it's not just for people that look like me or come from the northeast region of India. This book is going to be hopefully for everyone. The analogies and the stories and some of my theories, hopefully, come across and help people who ever read it.
Well, I'm really looking forward to reading that book. Do we have a name finalized? Do we know when it will be published?
I'm talking to a publishing company out of the UK. I may self-publish. The name, I thought I had a name, and then I thought last week I had another name, and I'm talking to some branding experts, and I've been told, listen, the book, you have a few seconds for somebody to pull that from the shelf and look at the name and the tag, and if it makes sense, they buy it. If it doesn't, they won't. And so, some of the names I've suggested may need you to go a little bit deeper to go, and they're like, it's not right. So I'm quite open to figuring the name out, hopefully by next week or the week after. I'm hoping it will be printed early next year. As I was trying to get it out for the end of this year, but realistically, I think it will be early next year, because I'm reading it again. My wife's reading it again, and I'm noticing little errors after it's been copy edited and proofread by professionals as well. So it's a work in progress, but I'm pretty sure by Q1, Q2 2021 it will be out. But no, thanks for asking, Noah.
Well, I think that that means that there's another IICIE episode there when your book is published, which will talk just about your book, because as I said, ultimately we are human beings. It is who we are. It's not the technology. It's not the other things.
It's for me, on this, we're all on this journey, as my president at the APMA, Flavia Volpe, says, we're on this spinning rock, and it's a miracle we're here. And so it's got to be enjoyed. You should be going to bed happy and getting up happy. That, to me, if you can have that, you are the most wealthiest individual in the world. It's, I don't go after materialistic wealth. I feel there is a X amount of, materialism you need in your life because of the way we are culturally. But the real value is of the individual and he or she being content and happy with who they are. Listen, I grew up in a school where there were 1,600 students, and me and my bro were the only two Sikh boys that wore a turban in the 80s, when being a skinhead was fashionable in the UK. And I grew up in a town where unemployment rates were close to 20%. There was 17%. And everybody wanted to blame my parents and people that looked like me for taking their jobs. And so if I can have a positive outlook on life, if I can see the world and the glass being half full, why can't the rest of us, and that's part of what my journey has been, and beyond the technology and the problem solving in design, is to change people's mindsets, to make them more aware of who they are. And part of the secret to that is truly going on the inner journey to begin to understand who you are as a person and to be content with who you are as a person. So looking forward to that second episode.
Thank you, and I've really enjoyed this episode. I hope our listeners also enjoy this. I think we've learned a lot, gone from tech to inner journey and probably spiritualism, which I really feel in this conversation. So thank you for that, Colin. Really appreciate you coming on this.
AJ, thank you very much for making me a guest on IICIE. Thank you very much.